Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and right now it is the 1st of January as I'm recording this. I'm not sure when you'll be listening to it yet, but it is time, I think, for the Gaming in the Wild Games of the Year Final Cut episode. I absolutely love Games of the Year time. It's a great time to comb back through the year that was, to think about all the great games that you've played, to list them all out, to think about what really had an impact on you. I love making this list. I spend a lot of time on it, and I love looking at other people's lists too. I love discovering games that I might have missed. I love hearing about what people found important and impactful and enjoyable in their year in games. And for me, 2022 was a really good year in games. Often, my list will start coming together midway through the year, and I'll have a very firm idea, and it will settle. It will settle in towards the end of the year. But this year, there were so many good games. I think I've never had a Games of the Year list in which games have gone from mentions up to second place and back down to mentions again, in which the top game has been several games throughout the year. That's pretty normal. And actually, my top game was pretty much nailed on from the second that I finished it. So that has been a constant. But there are some really, really good games here. I've played so many good games this year. Many of them were on Game Pass this year. Half of my top 10 are games that I played on Game Pass. It was really a year of indie games on Game Pass for me. But there are a couple of big AAA games in this list, in the mentions and in the list itself. There are some indie games of both the type that you will have heard about at things like the Game Awards and in other people's lists, and a couple that I feel like have gone pretty under the radar in terms of end-of-year lists and being appreciated this GOTY season. So I'm very excited to share this list with you. And if you are listening for the first time to this episode, because we always get an influx of people checking out Gaming in the Wild podcast around this time of year, I will mention that this isn't the first Games of the Year episode that I've done. This is my final cut. So this is my personal honourable mentions and top 10. But in the build-up to this episode, I've done a series of Games of the Year episodes. I've done 3 so far. I had great guest episodes with Brian Skirsha of Pixelated Playgrounds podcast, with Louis Brooks of Time Played 3HR podcast, and with Brad Galloway of the So Video Games podcast. And I also did an episode with a patron top 10 as voted for by the patrons of this show on Discord. So you can head back if you would like to hear more Games of the Year discussion and listen through those episodes. There is a pretty wide selection of games. Louis, Brad and Brian and the patrons all brought some great games to the table, and there's a whole lot of interesting discussion in those episodes. I certainly found out about a few games that I hadn't heard of or that had gone under my own personal radar in 2022 from those episodes. So there's loads more there if you would like to hear it. There are also Games of the Year series from 2021 and 2020 as well. So if you're interested in more Games of the Year content, you can find an awful lot of it in the back catalogue of this podcast. And as I was drawing up my list, I was thinking about how my list is different to many of the lists that I've seen. I've been watching shows like the Min-Max show, which has an excellent end-of-year series each year in which all of the correspondents for that podcast get together and kind of go to bat for their favourite games. And they have a really nice, transparent process where people talk through all of the highs of their own gaming year and fight for the games that they like, and they measure it based on passion. I've been this very day, listening to an end-of-year podcast by The Computer Game Show, another podcast in which they have a really fun format where correspondents come together and they have these head-to-heads where one game gets voted off and one elevates up to the next level. So there are all kinds of ways that people go about creating their Games of the Year lists. And I was thinking about how I really make mine. And when I look over the list that I have made, I realize that a lot of the games that I have here are games that stuck with me emotionally, that told me a story or showed me something that I hadn't really seen before, or had vivid moments that just really stuck with me, whether that's a view out across something, whether it's a character who makes me think in a way I hadn't thought before, whether it's a story that is unlike something that I've heard before, whether it's beautiful music and an art style that just took me somewhere else and shepherded me through a special seeming video game space. So lots of my picks are based on atmosphere and based on emotion and based on whether a game surprised me or not. So that's a little bit about the kind of games that I like and how I look at games as a critic and as a podcast host. It is often about the atmosphere. It is often about feeling things and being surprised, being taken aback by something. It's often about games being such a profoundly multidisciplinary art form that bring together art, design, text and writing, acting, motion capture, theatrical staging, cinematography, music, art styles, all of these things that come together when video games are made. They are such a fascinating medium for expression and for new ideas and for interactivity. I absolutely love video games for their potential, for the activity itself, for sinking into a trance and being transported somewhere different, somewhere new, somewhere you haven't been before, for the way that you drift into the screen and out of your own mind. It's so relaxing and so interesting, and I'm just forever in awe of the possibility of video games as one of the major emerging mediums of the last several decades. There is just so much happening all the time. I feel like video games are still growing. We're still finding out the limits of what they can do. We have not reached those limits yet. And some of the games that I have to talk about, and especially my game of the year, are games that really do things that I haven't seen before, take me to places that I couldn't have possibly imagined, and so I'm very excited to share this all with you. Before we do get into the list, please allow me to mention that this is a patron-supported show. Another great thing that happened this year was that the Patreon community of patrons really grew. The Discord grew. We've always had a pretty solid crew in there, but we just got some really active new members in our Discord community this year, patrons who pledged $1 a month or more to support this podcast, to help me upgrade all of my equipment, which is something that I did this year. So all of that Patreon money went straight back into the podcast, and hopefully it helped to make the podcast better. So the patrons of this show helped to make the podcast better, both by supporting it financially and just by taking part in this lovely, pleasant and caring little community of game lovers who just talk every day about all kinds of games and all kinds of things. And you are absolutely welcome to come and join us. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you'd like to support the show. But thank you very much to everyone who is listening, and you can also support the show in other ways. You can leave a star rating on Spotify, a review on Apple Podcasts, you can tweet out an episode that you like, or send it to a friend who you think might like it. All of those things are great, and I would just like to say a big thank you to all of the listeners and patrons of this podcast for making it a really special year. And with that said, let's move on and get into it with this Games of the Year Final Cut 2022 episode. So I have 16 games on my Games of the Year list here, and let's start off with a handful of honourable mentions. I have 5 games here that I really enjoyed this year, that stuck with me for one reason or another. They didn't quite break into that ultimate top 10 of the year, but these are games that I really, really enjoyed and would thoroughly recommend. And the first one came at the very start of the year. It's one of the first games that I played this year, in fact, and it is Nobody Saves the World by Drinkbox Studios, the makers of Guacamelee. This was a wonderful top-down, cartoon-style action-adventure. It looks a little bit like 2D Zelda in terms of the view, but everything looks hand-drawn and smoothly animated. And you play a little white, blobby guy, and you're not quite sure who your character is at the start of this game. But as you explore the map, you realise that you are in fact a shapeshifter, that you can use a magic wand to transform into all kinds of different forms. I guess they would be called classes in many other games, but you can be everything from a horse to a soldier to an archer to an egg, to a magician. And I won't spoil all of the many, many, many different things that you can become in this game. And each class that you become has its own weapons, and they are elemental. They can be sharp, they can be a blunt blow such as a stomp, they can be dark magic or light magic, and You walk around an overworld, slowly unlocking different areas of the map, completing quests for people, and going into these intricate, super fun, action-packed dungeons. And they are very colourful and very varied. Like, it can be the inside of a giant mushroom, it can be entering the carcass of a huge dragon, it can be a crashed UFO. Like, the dungeons are absolutely wild. They all have different enemies, and there is a meta story to the whole thing as well. It's very, very satisfying, very, very fun, colourful, and just a really wild time. And all of the time you are gaining experience. All of the time the numbers are going up. It is definitely a numbers going up game. And as you level up, you get new abilities. You can unplug abilities, for example, a kick from a horse, and plug it into a spare slot on your soldier character. So you can customize your characters to have light, dark, blunt, and sharp attacks, and just really, really put together some crazy builds in which you have weapons on cooldown, in which you have a main attack and so forth. And you burn through these dungeons, which are filled with waves and waves of enemies, bosses, traps, puzzles, all kinds of things. There is a roguelike element to the dungeons. If you die, you are taken back to the beginning and you go back in again and make another run. And as you unlock the map, the story is just pretty wild and hilarious. It's very lighthearted. It's very well put together. This was a really good game to start off the year. I didn't finish it. It was one of those games that I bounced off. I actually played the first half of this game twice. It was on Game Pass, although it's gone now, and it did get a Switch release. I'm halfway through my Switch playthrough now, and Switch is the perfect place for this game. You know how it is on Switch, like a top-down action game. Just suits the handheld format so well. And I really can't recommend this one enough. I think for a certain kind of person, this game just really clicks. It's the kind of game that could be addictive, that could just take over your mind, really. It's that kind of addictive, action-packed, fun game. It's just pure arcadey fun, this one. That's Nobody Saves the World. And the next game that I want to talk about is comparable to it in some ways. It looks visually similar. It's hand-drawn. It has roguelike elements. It's another game that I was really, really sucked into with a massive sense of progression. It's Rogue Legacy 2. I was initially skeptical about this one, having heard about how difficult it is. But there is something in Rogue Legacy 2 that I think is absolutely exemplary for the genre, and that is that in the roguelike genre, there is sometimes wasted runs. In games like Dead Cells, for example, which is a luminary of this genre, you will sometimes make a run where nothing really happens, where you don't get that far, or you get to a place you've been many, many times before. And as you layer on runs and runs and runs, things become stale and familiar, and progression is increasingly gated behind increasingly difficult bosses and just getting that golden run together. In Rogue Legacy 2, that is absolutely not the case. They have solved the problems of the roguelike genre in a way that I find to be very, very impressive. At the start of this game, you start in a castle, which is like a hub area, and every run you get money. There is constantly money flying around. There are coins. You get blueprints that enable you to unlock new weapons. And every single run, you'll land back in your hub. You will have enough money to buy something. It doesn't have to be something huge, but there is always something you can spend your money on. And they carry over from run to run. So you really do feel the ramping up of your character over time. You also unlock new classes in this game as well. So you start off with a basic knight guy. You end up with rangers. You end up with dragon lancers. You end up with an amazing archer, ranged weapons, duelists, all of whom have different movesets, different capabilities, and you re-roll your character at the start of every run, and as you upgrade, for example, your knight, your dragon lancer, your duelist, that class of character becomes better. So you're leveling up all of these different classes of character, and you're randomly rolling them at the start of each run, and so it's always different, and you are encouraged to play as all of those characters in a similar way to Nobody Saves the World. This game also does some really cool things with repetition. There are systems in place that ensure you won't end up playing the first area forever, as you do in Dead Cells. You will be able to advance through the game in a way that is more respectful of your time. And I will say that it's just incredibly fun. It's an incredibly fun video game. The moment-to-moment action is great. You will be avoiding projectiles. You will be charging enemies. You can get a dash. You can use a shield. You can figure out your play style, figure out the way that you like to play this game. There are all kinds of traps. There is a lot of platforming, and you will find objects that will open up new areas to you and abilities that will open up new areas to you. So it really smashes together like a Metroidvania sense of progression with the best possible scenario for a roguelike game that makes you feel like you're always growing and getting better. So Rogue Legacy 2 was a really good game this year. I was hooked to it pretty solidly for about a month, and then I fell off it. I came back and played for a couple more weeks, and I think I'm about 2/3 of the way through this game. There's something about roguelikes that do make me drop off eventually. I think the only one that I've really seen through was Hades, and that was because it had a very cool approach to story. Rogue Legacy 2 is perhaps a little light on story. There is a story there, but it is very, very, very light and surface level. So maybe that's why I slipped off this one. But if you are a fan of roguelikes or action platformers, then Rogue Legacy 2 is something really, really special. I feel like this is an incredibly high quality video game, and I couldn't recommend it more. And the next game that I have this year is a little curveball called Paradise Marsh by Lazy Etty, with a soundtrack by Disaster Piece that we're listening to right now. This is a surprising little game that just landed in my inbox one day. I requested a code for it. I ended up playing it in one sitting and was absolutely absorbed by this one. This is a strange little 3D exploration game from the first-person perspective where you are dropped into a simulated marsh. It's not at all realistic. It's very colourful. It reminds me, if anything, of games like Proteus, if you're aware of that one. There is a pixel art filter on it, and there are generative biomes that just stretch in all directions. And what you do in this game is that you get a net at the start of the game, and you go around catching bugs, catching frogs, catching tadpoles. You follow their songs. There is a wonderful generative soundscape in this game that responds to what you're doing. As you catch bugs, as you catch insects and so forth, you start to fill out a little book that tells you about their qualities, where you can find little facts about them, all of which is really fun. But then after you have completed the entry about one of the many, many different types of things that you can catch in this swamp, a sort of a super version of them will appear that you can then converse with. And you end up having these amazing conversations with these super varied, super funny characters, like the essence of tadpole. It's like the god of each animal almost. And they all have super funny personalities. The writing is really sparky in that kind of Night in the Woods, short hike, witty indie game way. A little flippant, a little funny, also quite deep and philosophical. And I don't think I played anything quite like Paradise Marsh this year, and I really didn't hear enough about this game. I would love for more people to play it, and I would love to hear from people who have played it. I really recommend this one. It was a real little gem this year that went under the radar. That's Paradise Marsh. I have two more honourable mentions to go, the first of which is Cult of the Lamb. This was a super popular indie game that came out this year in which you have two strands of game. You have a very zippy, rapid dungeon crawler in which you collect resources, take down bosses on multiple runs across different dungeons. Pretty cool, pretty fun, quite sort of strangely colourful and lively, almost like a Halloween ghost train in vibe. I quite like the combat in this game, pretty good. And then the other half of the game is a compound builder. It's like a village builder in which you have to use resources to build different types of structures. And then you build a small community that is a cult. You get followers in this game, you find them in dungeons, you rescue them when you defeat bosses, and your cult starts to grow. Your followers pray to you and fill up your faith, which you can then use as a currency to unlock further buildings, to unlock special sermons, fire circles, and activities for your cultists, all of which makes you more and more powerful as you go back into dungeons for another run again. This is a game that I finished across, I would say, 3 or 4 nights. I was completely hooked by it. There are all kinds of activities in this game. With the resources that you have to get can include fish. There's a fishing minigame. There is a card game of sorts that you can play with an old fella to win currency. There's a really funny story in which you're attempting to release this eldritch god by making the cult in their name, and you find out about other gods that have been imprisoned and so forth. You will end up facing off against them. So this is a super cool little indie game with beautiful cartoon visuals, great music, slick combat, and a fun village builder element. And I think that that's what this game did, really. It mashed together a funny cult sense of humour, very, very, very black humour, zippy combat roguelike thing in Village Builder in a way that we haven't really seen before. So it's like the cutest little roguelike. And something that Hades did very well in this genre was to give you a hub that is always changing. So after every combat run, you feel like you've accomplished something, and you feel like you've earned something that's going to help you in the future to progress through the game, both in combat and in story. So there are various payouts in this game. It's a very satisfying little video game. The only strike against it really is that it was in terrible shape when it released. My playthrough was plagued by bugs. I lost a save file and reported all kinds of bugs in the devs Discord. It was in tatters really when it came out, which is a real shame. And a bit of a surprise given that it's published by Devolver Digital. It has since been patched up, but that really did dent my playthrough. It kind of tainted my playthrough in a way. When I think back to Cult of the Lamb, I think on one hand of having just a really good time, and on the other hand of the massive frustration of just battling through bug after bug after bug. At almost any time when I was playing it, there was something wrong on the screen. And that really impacted my opinion of this one. I think if it had come out in a little cleaner shape, it could have been in my top 10 of the year, but as it stands, it's an honourable mention. That's Cult of the Lamb. And the final game that I want to mention in this little segment is something that has been with me for most of the year. It's a viral game that so many people have played, and it's maybe the game that I've played most consistently across the course of 2022. I've played this game for a short while on most days this year. It's Wordle. And Wordle occupies a strange space. It's a little 5-letter word game. You get a couple guesses to get the word right, use a process of elimination to rule out letters. And the real genius of Wordle is that it's just a fun little word game, and I absolutely love them. I love crosswords. I've always loved word games. But the social sharing element of this was absolute genius. We've all seen those little blocks of yellow and green squares that show the progress of someone as they solved Wordle that day. Twitter was absolutely covered in these at certain times of this year. I still send them to my dad sometimes. He still sends them to me. We still celebrate if we get Wordle in 2 or even 1. There is a channel in the Gaming in the Wild Discord where several people are still sharing their Wordle every day or every other day. So this is a game that really stuck with me. It was a real sensation this year. And now that I think about it, I mean, I even did Wordle this morning on the 1st of January over my morning coffee. So it was the first game that I played in 2023. And while it might not be a big, shiny AAA product or even like a game in a sense that many people would consider it, to me Wordle was just a piece of genius that came out this year. So I think Wordle deserves a shout out as one of the more memorable viral games of 2022. And before we get into the top 10, I have one more game that I want to mention. This is in a position that I haven't done before on my Games of the Year episode, but I didn't know what to do with this game. It is without a doubt one of the very best games that I played this year, and it was released for the first time in 2021, but it got a V1.5 release this year that was the real true release of this game, and we saw its potential realised. So I think this game deserves a special mention here, and that game is Cyberpunk 2077. And I imagine a few of you are thinking, what is Cyberpunk 2077 doing on the Gaming in the Wild Best of 2022 list? Never mind it being a non-2022 game officially. But hear me out on this one. I love a good open world game. I love a good cityscape. I love an environment. I love driving into a landscape, going deep into a landscape, going deep into a city, feeling lost in a place, in a video game. And I think that there wasn't a game that I played this year that quite gave me the same experience of that vastness and lostness as Cyberpunk 2077. When I think back to playing this game, I think back to exploring a desolate beach covered in detritus and washed up tires and watching the sun rise with the glittering glass towers of Night City in the foreground, and I think about driving out of the city into the wilderness, and the strange sight of these rusted up old wind turbines just littering the landscape. All the wind turbines that we see today, or at least all the ones that I see, are white and shiny and new, and we think of them as like a step forward in the climate battle. But here in Cyberpunk 2077, they are old now. They are kind of gone now. They are part of the past. And there are some such wonderful moments like that in this game. Like the architecture as you drive around the city looks like a real city. There is rarely a perfect view in this game, just as there is rarely a perfect view in a contemporary city. You will see strange buildings that seem to belong to different decades and entire different schools of architectural thought, just like a patchwork, in the same way that modern cities are. You will see people wandering around the city with this latest patch, all kinds of people, and everyone's got a line for you. You can talk to anyone. You'll start to hear them again, sure, but there's a sense of liveliness and a sense of bustle, and a sense of atmosphere. There are different neighborhoods in this city. There is a Chinatown, there's a Japantown. There are different types of industrial estate, whether it's a high security, rich industrial estate with fencing and security detail, or whether it's a more run-down industrial estate where the fences have been torn through and you can just hear dogs barking in the distance. There are huge dams, there are just the towers everywhere, the bridges over the river. You can see the shipping district. You can see just vast trash heaps on the edge of the city. This is a real place to me. I love the story as well. I love the gameplay. I found the loop to be enticing. My character evolved further than I thought that they would in terms of their combat and their abilities and their scope and build. The amount of weapons that there are brilliant. The character customization with clothing and so forth was fantastic, and my journey through Night City was wonderful from beginning to end. If you like the thought of driving around the best realized science fiction city that I've ever seen in a video game, then I can't recommend this game enough. The bugs are still there, but they are by no means the most interesting thing about this game. I really, really, really recommend Cyberpunk 2077. And that takes us into my top 10 games of the year. The first one, the number 10 spot, I always like the number 10 spot. I always feel like the number 10 spot is the place for a game to sneak in, a game that you might not expect, a bit of a wild card slot, and I enjoy treating it that way. And that's why at number 10 in my games of the year for 2022 is PowerWash Simulator. This is a game that I did not expect to like, that I speculatively downloaded to try it out on Game Pass. Little did I know that it would become my fourth most played game of the year in terms of the time spent playing it. It is just below Cyberpunk, Horizon, and Elden Ring. And I spent 50 hours in PowerWash Simulator, and I really don't know what happened. I don't know what to tell you. This is a first-person game in which you are presented with a cleaning job. You have power hoses of different types, different strengths, ranges, and filters, and you are presented with disgustingly filthy things to clean, whether it is a fire station exterior, whether it is a children's play park, whether it is a series of absolutely filthy vehicles from little buggies through to touring vans and that sort of thing. All of the elements of theme parks, like a giant Ferris wheel, and all you really have to do is get your hose out, find the dirt, find the right nozzle, find the right soap, and then blast away the dirt. You are cutting swathes through this dirt. So if you see a black window, you might have to use a strong hose or some glass soap to carve that dirt off. If you hit one of the buttons, you will see all of the dirt that is left flash up orange, so you can see how far through you are in the job. Every element is individual in this game. So a window frame is one element, a glass pane is another element, a skirting board is another element, and as you clean them, they flash. When each one is completed, it flashes. You get a little ding sound, you get a little bit of money, a little bit of reward, and so there's a lovely sense of progression in this game. But the thing that I love about it really is just the zen feeling that I got from it. I found it so incredibly addictive. I think this is probably the most addictive game that I played this year, and the absolute pleasure of, for example, a skate park with its huge curving shapes that people are used to skating on, absolutely caked in mud, and getting a really wide, quite strong hose going and just carving all of that dirt away before you get into the corners, before you blast the dirt off every screw, before you have to climb up things with the crazy little bit of platforming you have to do in this game to get to high places and clean the tops of fence posts and so forth, before eventually, after half an hour or 1 hour or 2 or more, you have finally cleaned the entire skate park. Everything is sparkling and fresh and clean as if it's just come out of the box, as if the opening ribbon has just been cut on the skate park or the theme park or the fire station or the underground station. The challenges get bigger and bigger in scope. There is a strange little story here too, but it's really just there for colour. I absolutely loved PowerWash Simulator. It is the strangest pick and the most unlikely pick on this list. Like, this dadcore cleaning game has made it onto my top 10 games of the year, but I spent 50 hours playing it. I completed it. I loved it. And I'm going to be honest, I would do it again. That's number 10 on my list this year, PowerWash Simulator. That takes us to number 9, a very different game. A little indie game that I think is probably the least played game on this entire top 10. It was kickstarted and self-published. I actually bought it by accident, thinking it was another game, and here it is, an accidental purchase on my top 10 of the year. At number 9, it's Haiku the Robot. And Haiku the Robot is a Metroidvania made in the Game Boy Color style. It only has a few colours on screen. You play as little round robot, and you wake up in a world that seems to have been trashed somehow. You wake up in a little storage room, you come out of a closet, and there you are. And that's all you really know. You fall down a huge chute with rubbish falling in the background. Beautiful, beautiful pixel art in this game. A lovely soundscape. Lovely, simple pixel art graphics, and off you go on a big adventure. And the world that exists under the beginning point of Haiku the Robot is fascinating. You'll find abandoned factories, you'll find wasteland, you'll find tips, you'll find old tunnels far beneath this mechanical city that seems to have been turned off or stopped working. And as you progress through this story, you will discover some of the truth of what happened to this world. It's an absolutely gripping game with a beautiful sense of discovery. I adored my time with this one. There were great bosses, lovely little Metroidvania tasks for you to do. The moves that you get are great. They come at quite a rate as well. So if you're looking for the wall grab or the double jump or the dash or all of those cool things that you get in Metroidvanias and that you really need to progress, you don't have to wait for them too long in Haiku the Robot. It's like a mini digital Hollow Knight, just beautifully realized and painstakingly created by a first-time solo developer called Mr. Morris. This really was one of the more memorable games that I played this year, and I can't recommend it enough. Get this one onto your Switch if you have any love for Metroidvanias. That is Haiku the Robot. And the next game that I have here, placed at number 8 on my list, may be a controversial pick to some because of its placement. This is a game that I spent 70 hours with this year. It's a game that had a lot of hype that I maybe didn't even expect to like. But like it I did. I liked it enough to get through several huge roadblock bosses, to really change the way that I play combat, to relearn combat systems as I know them. Yep, you got it. It's Elden Ring. And I think it's important, whilst talking about this game in my own personal Games of the Year for 2022, to talk about a little bit of context. This was my first Dark Souls game. I have shied away from them. I've got a little bit of history with some games that I consider hard. I have completed Hollow Knight, Hyper Light Drifter, games that really pushed me to my limit. But the Dark Souls games have always been a little intimidating to me, to be honest. I don't like intentional difficulty and intentional deep hostility towards the player. tends to be not what I'm really there for. And I understand that difficulty is only one aspect of what From Software do, that people also like the online version of the game where people are helping each other out. They like the lore. They like the deep gothic lore of these games, the worlds that these games exist in, the grotesque enemies that you'll come across, and the climactic boss battles, the sense of dread that you get moving through these broken worlds that From Software create, and the deep, dark fantasy of it all. And I got a taste of that this year with Elden Ring. The things that I liked about this game are really the sense of wonder and the sense of discovery that I got moving through the lands between, from that first moment when you come out from an underground vault, up a lift and into this dead wilderness where you can see towering castles in the distance, you can see mountains, and as you progress through Limgrave, you see giants mournfully pulling giant black carriages, you see huge gold knights, you see dragons, you see giant crabs roaming swampy lakes, and over it all there is the huge Erd tree, this giant golden tree just haunting the sky. It's absolutely transfixing, really. And whilst I had, of course, with it being my first From game, something of a turbulent entry into the combat, because this is really a game that is all about combat. It's all about killing. You carve your way across this continent, killing 95% of everything that you find in your way. It's a world that is uniformly hostile to the player. There's a couple of NPCs. There is a story here for those who want it. There are, as FromSoft games seem to have, loads of item descriptions that you can read and texts that you can dig up if that's what you're looking for. I didn't really do any of that stuff. I found the story to be quite light, and that method of delivery, that sort of obscure, abstruse FromSoft method of delivery didn't really get into me. I didn't really appreciate picking through clues to try and drag a story out. And so that's probably why it's placed number 8 on my list and not higher. But some of my very best moments playing games this year came in Elden Ring. Stormvale Castle, that first hulking, brooding castle that you come across, and the depth and complexity of the labyrinth that you work your way through, the bosses you fight along the way, the surprises, the traps, and eventually the first big roadblock of the game, Margit, the Fell Omen, a boss that must have taken me 30 attempts to get through. But get through it I did. I didn't use any summons. I was at a pretty low level, and I just learned the patterns and executed the attacks, learned how to block, learned when to dodge, and finally got past Margit. It felt huge. It was like a little bit of a mental breakthrough for me. And after defeating that boss, I really thought, like, I can do this, you know. And I went on to complete the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. I went on to defeat Radahn, and I really went deep into Elden Ring. I got deep into it. I did learn the combat. I started to feel overpowered at times and was just carving through bosses first time. So I managed to surmount that impossible seeming task of learning a Souls game, and it was liberating, and I'm glad that I did it. Some of the moments that I had on that journey were incredible. I will never forget working my way through the Academy of Rhea Lucaria, the architecture, the gothic style, and the wizards that haunt your every step. And maybe my favourite moment in the whole game actually was coming down into an underworld cavern and finding all of these petrified people standing in a vast, shallow lake, with a huge skeletal figure sitting in a giant throne, just slumped and dead. And I thought, oh, it's going to get up, I'm going to have to fight it. But this giant lizard soldier, as tall as a tower block, dropped out of the sky in front of me. It was the Dragonkin soldier. And this must be one of the most memorable and intense boss battles I've ever had in a game. I did manage to defeat that boss eventually with some help from people in the Discord and on Twitter telling me to, for example, not stand in the water when he does electrical attacks because it will kill you. And it was just a sense of accomplishment that people talk about in FromSoft games. I finally did get a taste of it this year, so I had a really good time with this one. I think for the reasons that I've outlined, it doesn't quite make the higher reaches of my personal list. I wish that they had made more of the story and the story delivery, and that the quests were a little more fully formed and a little less obscure and abstruse. Some of the UI elements were difficult for a first-time player, using summons, using furled fingers, and so forth. I felt like this was a game that, for me personally, had a lot of problems as well as all of its successes, but I really did enjoy it. I'm happy that I played it, and I'm glad to have it on my top 10. That's Elden Ring. And from one of the most dense, dark fantasy open worlds and expansive games that we've ever seen through to a discreet, small, pixel art text adventure, number 7 in my top 10 games of 2022 is Roadwarden. Roadwarden is another game that came as a big surprise to me. I had it recommended to me by a couple of people, one of whom is Jacob Chiptip18 from the show's Discord, one of whom is a colleague from my job called Anders. So thank you to Jacob and Anders for recommending this one to me. This is an interesting little game. It's a very text-heavy adventure. It's almost like an interactive work of fiction. There are walls of text in this game. Even if you look at something like Disco Elysium, you'll find that text is delivered to you in short lines of dialogue and tweet-length descriptions, with some level of interactivity in them, and moving around the world as well. This game is all about the text, really. It does have a little panel for a pixel art tableau that shows you a rough approximation of where you are. There is a thick middle panel where the text appears, and a status panel on the right where you have things like your health, whether you need to eat, whether you need to sleep, how much currency you've got, your inventory, and that sort of thing. But for the most part, you're reading text, you're clicking on the thing that you would like to do, selecting options. You will occasionally get a little text box where you can punch in a word. For example, if you're in a tower, you can say, sweep the floor, sweep away hay, and maybe you'll find a hatch leading downwards, that sort of thing. There is a tree with these strange hairy roots that you will come across, and there's a text box there, and you can choose what to do. Touch the root, stroke the root, cut the root, etc. You can punch in words. And for me, this game took me back to some sentimental stuff. It took me back to the old choose-your-own-adventure books that I played as a kid. It took me back to reading fantasy novels, which I did throughout my entire teens and most of my 20s too. And the place that you explore in this game is just absolutely compelling. It's a wild peninsula on the northern edge of a realm. You have been sent there to explore, to scout, to open the roads, to gather information on resources and so forth, and report back to the Merchants Guild in the capital. And you really don't know what you're going to find. There is a sense of wild adventure in Roadwarden. You really do feel like you're on the edge of the world. When you come to the first camp, it has been decimated. The Empire's foothold is gone. The guards are troubled. They've been overrun by large wild animals. They have tales of local necromancers, of local villages with strange customs, of hermits living in the wilderness, of mysterious goings-on, bandits, of wild expanses of road that have just been overrun by plant life and just destroyed over time. And you ride around on your mount, choosing where to go, using the map to navigate between points. And as you progress, you'll meet people, you'll meet local village leaders, you will meet all of these people across time. You'll find these long expanses of river that you have to figure out a way to cross. Maybe you have to go and get some things. Maybe you have to meet someone who can repair a bridge. And as you move around, you talk to people, you choose what side of yourself you would like to expose to them. This game has some of the most consequential decision-making and effective branching paths that I think I've experienced. And the mystery goes deep. There is a time limit on this game. I think you get 90 in-day games, and you do have to sleep at the end of every day. Night gets very dangerous, and you do have to eat. You do have to find currency, buy food, upgrade your equipment, and so forth. But as you move around this world and talk to all of these people, depending on what you do, on where you choose to apply your attention, and whether you choose to help people, on what kind of information you decide to volunteer, on how you present your personal politics, how you present yourself in your dress style, people will treat you entirely differently. No one will have the same journey around this wild peninsula of Roadwarden. And the ending is vastly tailored based on every micro decision that you made, on the status of your relationship with different people, on whether you managed to achieve certain mini missions, such as finding out what became of the last Roadwarden, Asterion, such as identifying resources that you can either choose to exploit and send information back to the Empire, or reveal them to locals who can then open a trade route and profit themselves. There is so much scope inside of this game, and it really is a truly memorable experience. I remember some of these forest paths. I remember some of the giant creatures that I avoided or even fought. I remember trying to make enough friends to help me out with certain tasks, and it really did feel like it was all hanging by a thread. It's an absolutely compelling game. I really recommend that people play it. I played it on Steam. I recommend using a mouse for this one. There's a lot of text to read. So that's my 7th placed game of 2022, Roadwarden. And just before we get into the top 5, there is one more game. Number 6. It is probably my most anticipated game of the year, and one of the biggest games on this list. I was really looking forward to this game, and I'm happy to say that it delivered. It is Horizon Forbidden West. So Horizon Forbidden West is the AAA, giant-budget, Sony-exclusive follow-up to Horizon Zero Dawn, one of my favourite open-world games of all time. I still think it's probably the most beautiful open-world game of all time, until Forbidden West came out. This is the continuing story of Aloy, a strange girl in a far future, where the world has been overtaken by giant machines in the shapes of animals that roam the wilds. In the first game, we unpacked some of how that world came to be what it is, and we discovered a lot about Aloy, a very compelling heroine, a very humane heroine, and one of the more interesting and human-seeming protagonists I've ever played as. I absolutely love Aloy. I think she's wonderful. And Horizon Forbidden West builds on Horizon Zero Dawn in many, many ways. It's a huge visual upgrade. It is the most next-gen feeling game that I've played. They have improved upon some of the flaws of the original, such as stilted feeling dialogue and climbing problems. They've improved them. Like you get a glider in this game, so you can glide down from high places. You can vault over things that are in front of you, so there's less running into walls and so forth. But the thing that really makes this game special, I think, is just the vast vista of this world is incredible. It's a ruined post-apocalyptic world that has been overgrown, deeply overgrown, and almost built over by a new human culture that is tribal, that uses face paint, that is warlike, that makes things out of machine parts whilst hunting machines, makes pigment from dirt, uses wood, uses bows, a non-technological tribal society in a super cool post-apocalyptic world. And it's built over America, this time the west of America, and so the journey feels like this vast road trip through a desert, through jungle, through lots of different types of biomes and topography. You meet amazing characters along the way with some of the best facial mocap I've ever seen, with stellar voice acting, and with some really, really significant developments on the amazing story of Horizon Zero Dawn. And in this game, you are trying to assemble an AI to power it up enough that it can start to wrestle with the vast problem of what is happening in this world, which is starting to crumble for story reasons. And so you spend your time striking out into the wilderness in search of things that will help this AI to be more powerful. You're looking for old technology that is long forgotten, long buried, with only clues of where you can find what you need. And some of the installations that you find things in, and some of the strange locations that you find things in. And I absolutely love the sense of future archaeology that I get in these games, because it's a future, but it's a future that has been buried. So it's sci-fi to us, like technology that doesn't exist yet, styles of building that we haven't imagined yet, but it's old in this world. It's rusted, it's collapsed, it's buried, it's flooded. And so you as Aloy, this future heroine protagonist, have to delve into these dead machine environments and the remnants of a society that is gone. And I really love that about this game. I love the sense of adventure. I love the sense of discovery. The world itself is just absolutely beautiful. The way that sand blows across dunes, the way that light floods in through broken windows and installations, the way that you can find half-working machines with just a blinking light. Aloy has a focus. It's a little device that clips onto the side of her head that allows you to scan the world. It's something that I've loved ever since Metroid Prime. I love scanning a world, and I love learning about a world in that way. The hunting is good in this game. You hunt machines for parts. You use the parts to build upon your weapons and grow your arsenal. The combat is very, very satisfying in this game. It's some of the most satisfying open world combat I've ever experienced. That's because all of the enemies are modular. You can scan them, you can see their weak points, you can use different types of elemental arrows to blow their armor off, to blow their fuel tanks, and to slowly pick apart these monstrous machines that will start to limp, that have great AI, that stalk you and hunt you, and that come at you in really unexpected ways. The combat in this game is just phenomenally good. The world is absolutely beautiful. The Aloy herself is a wonderful character. The supporting cast is brilliant in this game. And what Horizon does really is that it presents you with a beautiful, vast, sprawling open world with intriguing tribal cultures to discover, with a vast array of fascinating machines that you can take down, with really solid progression, skill trees, a great story that is just absolutely gripping. It's very clever, and whilst it doesn't hit the heights of the revelations we got in Horizon Zero Dawn, it's still absolutely compelling. I think this is one of the best sci-fi stories in all of games, and I absolutely loved my time with this one. I loved exploring this world. I felt absolutely immersed in this world. And I had a much better time in this game than God of War Ragnarok, which doesn't feature on my list, and to be honest, more fun than Elden Ring too. The way that it delivers the story, and the variety of mechanics in this game, the crispness with which they are all designed. There is a really rich set of activities for you to do in this game, whether you're collecting all of these rogue drones by carrying out traversal puzzles to get high, jump on them and pull them down to the ground, whether you're climbing tall necks to reveal the environment around you, whether you're hunting down giant machines for very specific parts. This is just a vast adventure. Some of the best moments that I had in my gaming year were definitely in this game. Some of the amazing environments that you find yourself in, the way that it uses light, the way that it uses scale, the mountaintop views that you will find, the fact that flying and swimming and underwater diving have all been added to the game, the way that it takes some of the best parts of Horizon Zero Dawn and builds on them in new and exciting ways, like the way that the cauldrons are in this game is just completely different, very imaginative. The fascinating underground installations that you will explore and the revelations that you will find there. There is significant plot developments that really do move the needle. This game made my eyes pop open. It made me laugh. It made me smile. I absolutely loved my time with it. That's Horizon Forbidden West. And as I loved that game so much, it was really hard to see it fall outside of my top 5, but it's such a strong top 5 that there really just wasn't space for it. And at number 5 in my Games of the Year for 2022 is a little platformer that just came out of nowhere. I had never heard of the team that made it before, but it swept me away. I played it in just a couple of sittings. It is one of the most joyful experiences that I had gaming this year, and it is called Tinykin. And I'm pretty on the record as a Nintendo fan. Nintendo was my way into video games in many ways, especially console gaming. I always have a soft spot for a colourful, joyful, Mario-style or Pikmin-style adventure. It's just wholesome, it's colourful, it has great music, crisp controls, lovely game design. And funnily enough, the Nintendo game that I liked most this year wasn't by Nintendo. It was in fact Tinykin, made by Splash Team. It has all of the hallmarks of classic Nintendo games. It's a colourful romp through a strange little world. It looks a little bit like the Paper Mario games, I would say. You play like a little 2D character guy, like a little paper-thin character who runs around and traverses a huge human house that is vastly oversized. So it has a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of vibe to it. It also has a retro sci-fi vibes. There's lots of like laser beams and lots of astro suits and that sort of thing. And in this house, you'll find lots of different insect civilizations that have taken over the house. And you do little tasks for them, you meet them, you discover more about their world, but the real joy in this game is the traversal. So every time you complete a level, you move through into a new room of the house, whether it's the bathroom, the living room, a bedroom, with this massive towering bed that is just so high, and you're like a tiny little ant. But you have lots of traversal mechanics at your disposal. You have a little bar of soap that you can use to skate around this world and to slide across spider webs that span the space of the giant rooms. You have lots of little Tinykin, and these are little Pikmin-style creatures that you pick up on your way around the room. You can use them for all sorts of different things, to solve puzzles by conducting electricity, or by stacking them up and using them as a ladder, by throwing them to break through something, that kind of thing. And they all float around you in this really cool way. If you've played Pikmin, you'll know that it can be a little frustrating controlling your Pikmin. In Tinykin, they've taken away all of the frustration, and with it much of the depth of Pikmin, but what has been put there in its place is just really, really streamlined gameplay. I flew through this game in a couple of sittings, and the traversal and the movement in this game is an absolute joy. It's a massive collectathon. The world is funny, the music is lovely, the visuals are bright and colourful, and this is just a really good, feel-good video game. And I had so much fun with it, I really did. It lifted my spirits to play Tinykin. I think this is a really special game. It's on Game Pass. If you have Game Pass, please do give it a try. Get through the first couple worlds. You'll have a great time with this one. If you've any love for classic Nintendo in your heart, you must give this one a try. That's Tinykin. And from that slick, streamlined, childlike, colourful, cartoon romp of a game to one of the most heady games on this list, this is a game that covers a dizzying amount of subject matter, of real-world and near-future sci-fi, using point-and-click mechanics, a deep story that touches on all kinds of contemporary issues, from the Internet of Things to industry to border communities to extreme politics and cults to people being crushed under the wheels of capitalism. This is a deep, intelligent, fascinating game, a stylistic masterpiece, set in a backwater of Louisiana over in the United States, called NORCO. There was nothing really like NORCO released this year. This is a one-off. If you're looking at games like Kentucky Route Zero, if you're looking at games like Disco Elysium, if you're looking at some of the heavyweights, the games that touch upon art, that touch upon literature, games that have something to say, games that have a political stance, games that are just rich and deep and full of information, NORCO is one of those games. And this is the result of lots of research and lots of life experience. It's by Geography of Robots and was headed up by a developer called Yutz, a first-time developer who I have interviewed on this show. Yutz is from NORCO in Louisiana and has a very in-depth knowledge of the local politics, of the local topography, of the way that the industry has affected cultures out there in Louisiana. And this game is loaded with all of that stuff. You will learn about drainage ditches and toxic water in that Erin Brockovich style. You'll learn about how floods have washed away communities. You'll learn about corporate ownership of land. You will learn about local politics and how infected it is, and the precarity with which communities survive and individuals survive, and how they survive in this strange, hostile corner of the United States. And while it seems like dystopian, near-future science fiction, and it does lean in that direction, there's a lot of real world in here too. So as you're playing this compelling sci-fi story, by clicking around between scenes, pixel art scenes, clicking on objects, solving puzzles, picking dialogue options, and finding your way through this very rich linear journey, this story-led journey through NORCO, you really do learn a lot along the way. This is such a rich game, and all of the subjects that it touches on are just fascinating. It's like an amalgam of so much information, insight, humor, so much great writing, so much history and so much local knowledge, ideas about where the future might go, some abstract and strange takes on the gig economy and the Internet of Things, of UFO sightings, of strange religious cults. And within all of that, it has a very personal story at its heart about someone who is coming back to their hometown, having left, having fled, and the experience, the nostalgia and the strangeness of arriving in a place where everything is different and yet everything is the same. I absolutely adored this game. I think it's one for a certain mood, very much like Roadwarden. It's a game to settle down, settle into, be prepared to read a lot, and to just let it wash over you and to enjoy it. I had a great time with this one. It's my number 4 game of 2022. That's NORCO. And for the top 3 games, I have 3 fantastic games here, all of which just blew my mind in completely different ways. I kind of had a hard time separating these 3, so please consider this a very close race for the top 3. But the game that I've chosen for number 3 is a vastly compelling and absolutely atmospheric sci-fi story called Citizen Sleeper. Much like NORCO, this is a thoughtful game. It has deep themes in it. It has themes of precarity. It has cyberpunky themes of how capitalism overwhelms society and individuals. And in this game, you play an android who arrives on a worn-down, falling-apart space station with all different kinds of people living there, with many communities living there. It's broken apart, the government is barely holding it together, people are really doing their own thing, and you arrive as a newcomer, you have to carve out a life, you have to find the medication that you need to survive, you have to find somewhere to sleep, you have to find work, and in doing so, you encounter all kinds of different people going through all kinds of different problems. You can choose whether you want to help them, whether you want to know them. You get a certain amount of dice at the start of every morning, and you can spend those dice on whatever you'd like to do, whether that happens to be babysitting for someone that needs it, whether it happens to be salvaging machinery that you can sell for money, whether it happens to be stealing food or working for food. You can choose what kind of life you want to make for yourself, whether you want to enter gangland, whether you want to enter different kinds of communities and really try and carve out a life for yourself. You meet all kinds of fascinating characters along the way. One that everyone talks about is a noodle salesman that you meet in a busy marketplace who tells you stories and likes to hear your stories. You have wonderful, memorable, sensitive, tender conversations with all kinds of people. And the game really addresses all kinds of issues too. I have very strong memories of this game. The soundtrack by Amos Roddy is incredibly atmospheric. It has that once-removed feeling that Gareth Damian Martin's first game, In Other Waters, did too. It's a UI-heavy game. So you're looking at a diagram of the space station. You click on places that you'd like to go to. You never really get to set foot inside them. It's not a whizzy 3D game. It's almost like looking at an architectural diagram. But you do get illustrated portraits of the people that you meet and talk to, and the text is just so rich and well written. It's very sensory. There is a sense of space and coldness, of the stars turning behind you, of the strange metallic environment that you found yourself in. And your mind does a lot of the work here, I think. As you read the text, you can almost hear the sounds, smell the smells of these places that are being woven in your mind. I had such a strong reaction to this game. It felt like a place that I missed after I'd finished the game. And I really did feel that I was getting to make meaningful choices and decide what kind of android I wanted to be. And I found a place where I felt comfortable. And as soon as I found it, it felt like home. I started staying there and spending more time there, investing my dice rolls in activities there. And it really did simulate the feeling of entering a community, of finding your place in a new city. And that's a really special feeling. There was that feeling of butterflies, of excitement and nervousness that this game gave me. There are lots of different outcomes in this game, and you can choose the ending that you want, or you can keep on playing afterwards until you've found an ending that feels right for you. I played through all of the endings, and I did in the end find one that felt right for me and became my personal canon of how the story ends. I really didn't want it to end, and luckily for us, Gareth Damian Martin has started making DLC for the game. There are 2 DLC chapters out now, and a 3rd one coming this year. I think that this is an all-time great. It's a wonderful story. It's sensitively and intelligently put together. The gameplay is fantastic. The writing is phenomenal. The music is absolutely wonderful. This could very easily have been my game of the year, and I think on another year it would have been. I really recommend everyone plays this one. That's Citizen Sleeper. And the next game on my list breaks the trend of the last handful of games of being Game Pass games. This is a game that was only available on PlayStation this year. It's an indie game that swept over the gamosphere, that went extremely viral, but it really outdid my expectations, even though I was really looking forward to this one. This is, of course, the cat game. It's Stray. And Stray is a game that came to people's attention when it was on a State of Play or some kind of Sony presentation, and the world was just transfixed by the idea of this little ginger cat walking through what looks like a science fiction Chinatown with floods of neon light, with open windows that you could jump through, with bottles you could push over, with robots walking around who seemed to fear you or to be interested in you. And that premise is incredibly powerful. It certainly worked on me. The big questions I had about Stray are, is it going to feel good? Is it going to feel like you are a cat? Are we going to get that sense of fluidity of movement, of acrobatic jumping, of incredible coordination? And how can they accomplish that? And I was overjoyed to find that they did indeed accomplish it. They did so with quite an innovative jumping system where you see a little cursor appear on things that you can jump onto. When you hit the button, you will jump straight to that cursor. So you're selecting the point that you're going to jump to rather than the point that you're jumping from. If you hold down the button and run, the cat will do acrobatic, graceful leaps between window ledges or across improbable narrow pathways on the winding labyrinthine rooftops of this strange environment you find yourself in. So Stray really did win me over, and partially it's because you play as a cat. There has not been a cat simulator as good as this one. You can scratch sofas, you can scratch rugs, you can scratch doorways, you can rub around the legs of these robots to try and get their attention. You can behave like a cat. You can drink from pan lids, drink rainwater, and explore from this cat's eye perspective, slipping through tiny ventilation shafts, running between legs, tripping people over, jumping onto a chessboard and scattering the pieces. It's absolutely packed with delightful feline moments. But the real surprise for me in this game was that the environment itself is the real star of the show. You are exploring this vast, dilapidated indoor city in perpetual darkness and cold, in which humanity is gone. You find your way into it in the opening sequence of the game, and as the cat protagonist, you can try and untangle the story of what's happened here. Like, where has humanity gone? Why are these robots everywhere? They are melancholic beings. They have little screens for faces. They move absolutely wonderfully, and I think the fact that the camera is at cat height really helps. You are looking up at everyone that you see most of the time. And these robots are so sad and so pleasant. They have personalities, they have thoughts, they will speak to you, they will tell you about their own sadness of being trapped in this dark, damp place. And they've started to mimic human behavior almost as a tribute to humanity, the race that they were presumably created to serve, which has now gone. They take pictures of groups of friends and pin them to their walls. You can explore all of these apartments that used to be inhabited by people, but are now filled by android inhabitants who are just trying to carve out a strange, melancholic life for themselves. And these environments are absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. The streets with the neon lights, the apartments that you can slip into and see the light being cast from a static television screen. You can jump up onto benches, you can look at all of the pictures on the walls, you can look at the books, the newspapers, you can look at how these robots are using refrigerators, you can jump up onto sofa cushions and say hello to one of the robots, and they do little heart emojis at you. There is a sense of urban exploration in this game that I just absolutely adore. I will also say that it does an amazing job of leading you through the world. You can jump up aircon units to scale huge buildings and get onto rooftops. The aircon units have these little ribbons blowing from them that catch your eye and that show you the way forward. And in such a big world as such a small cat, I think that it's masterful game design that your eye is always led to where you need to go. Some of the openings that you have to get through are, not much bigger than a cat flap, and this world is just a vast, fully realised city with several hub areas, and the fact that I always found my way to where I had to go, the fact that I never got lost, and the fact that I just had this sense of unfurling wonder, warmth, and melancholy, humour, that just haunted every step of my journey through Stray. I think that they have created a spectacular place here. There are such fascinating environments that you move through, and that combination of a sad, melancholy sci-fi story, an absolutely beautiful cyberpunk game world, great dialogue and wonderful plot developments, and the agility and the pleasure of moving through this fascinating underground city is just something that I haven't seen before, something that will stick with me, something that I will remember. And so even though games like Citizen Sleeper and NORCO are unforgettable and ambitious in different, bigger ways than Stray, there is something about the world of Stray that I think is very special and just hit me on a visceral level. There is a mood that I associate with those damp, dripping streets and the downtown hub, the slums, and all of the strange places that this game takes you that felt like a dream, it felt like a journey, it felt like a place that I went to. And so it's just such a vivid experience that it's my number 2 game of 2022. That's Stray. So just to recap this top 10, at number 10 I had PowerWash Simulator, at number 9 Haiku the Robot, at number 8 Elden Ring, at number 7 Roadwarden, 6 Horizon Forbidden West. The top 5 was Tinykin at number 5, number 4 was NORCO, number 3 was Citizen Sleeper, and number 2 was Stray. This is an incredibly strong top 5, but the game at the top of this list has been there since I played it. It went in with a bullet. It's a game that moves forward the idea of what games can be. It is dizzyingly ambitious and completely astonishing. It has some jaw-dropping moments of surprise and revelation. I think this is a real all-timer. My number 1 game of 2022 is Sam Barlow's playable cinema masterpiece, Immortality. And Immortality is a game that is unlike any other. It's not often that you can say that about a game. There are many games on this list that have their own thing going on. They are all fascinating in one way or another, but Immortality just absolutely blew me away. This is a game unlike any other. There is no other game that does what Immortality does. It's ostensibly the story of an actress called Marissa Marcel. Her career, the 3 films that she made, none of which were ever released for mysterious reasons. And this game does have some of the mechanics that you might recognise if you have played Sam Barlow's previous works, such as Telling Lies and Her Story, a method of sorting through film clips. You use the controller to wind back and forward through clips at different speeds. You see a grid of film clips, and as you grow your selection of clips, they land in this grid, which you can sort in different ways. You can rewatch any clip if you feel like you've missed something, or if you feel like it might lead somewhere else. And you discover clips from clips. So if in a clip there is a candle or a window or an actress's face, you can click on that candle or window or actress's face, and it will take you into another clip at the exact point where that appears. So you will land in new clips halfway through them. If you click on a candle, you might be cut into a church scene in a different movie to the one that you were just watching, a place where a candle occurs. So you can thematically explore clips. And so what you're doing really is looking for new clips. You're unearthing clip after clip after clip. You are using the match cut mechanic to find new clips. And as you do so, you start to slowly assemble a vast range of film footage. And it's not just film footage with clapboards and a director shouting action and cut and so forth. You get all kinds of footage. So you get casting calls, table reads, You get chemistry tests between male and female leads. You get location scouting, rap parties, candid footage, personal footage that really shouldn't be in the public realm. Before and after action and cut is said in any cinematic clip, you can wind back before then. So you can sometimes see actors preparing or having conversations that aren't part of the film. So what you're really getting is this amazing look at Marissa Marcel's life as a person, as an actress, on and off camera. And you have to solve the mystery of what on earth happened to her. She had 3 films that were never released, and you'll be jumping between all of them. And I think that this has proven confusing for people because it's like you're watching 3 films in parallel and jumping between them from scene to scene. So none of this is linear. You discover clips in a fairly random order, and you can mindfully explore certain themes by clicking on, for example, crosses and so forth to try and unearth new clips. But you're jumping between 3 films. One of them is a historic religious thriller set in a monastery called Ambrosio. One of them is a 1970s film noir set in the New York City art scene called Minsky. And one of them is a weird, glossy 90s thriller called Two of Everything. And every player of this game will discover different clips in different orders. We'll have characters introduced to them in different orders. We'll find climactic scenes, such as a death scene, such as a romance scene, such as candid footage where you see Marissa off camera giving you really, really key information. No 2 players will have the same journey through this footage, and there is a lot of active piecing together of the narrative that has to go on in your own mind, really. Like, the game gives you all of the source material, but how you join the dots, what clips you get or don't get, and what conclusions you arrive at as a result of that is a unique personal path through what this game is offering you. And I absolutely love that. I love that everyone will be confronted with a similar assortment of source material in a completely different order, and they bring their own associations and their own thoughts to the table. And so, while one of the common off-putting factors or criticisms of Immortality might be its unconventional gameplay style, and a different kind of interactivity, a less direct kind of interactivity to what we're used to in many of the other games on this list, it's a really unique and compelling form of interactivity and detective work that you're engaged in here. I had an absolute blast with this one. It was chilling, it was absorbing and intriguing, and there are levels in this game that I cannot talk about for spoiler reasons, but the game goes deep in the same way as something like Inscription. There is more going on here than meets the eye, and I've given you a surface description of what Immortality is, but there are levels to this game, honestly. And if anyone plays through this game, you're gonna be shocked. I mean, there were moments in this game where the blood froze in my veins, the hairs on the back of my neck shot up. I looked at the screen and just paused the game and said, "What the fuck?" Like, I've not had a moment that was quite as impactful as some of the reveals of Immortality this year. This is a very, very special game. I think it's not only the best game of this year, but I think it's a multidisciplinary masterpiece. I think it elevates what games are, what they can be in terms of concepts, staging, the execution and scope, the writing, the storytelling, the non-linear, strange, multi-layered storytelling, and the acting. I mean, the actors in this game are playing actors who are playing characters. There are several levels deep at all times. And the fact that this was able to happen at all is just mind-boggling to me. Immortality is a masterwork, it is an artwork, and it is my favourite game of 2022. So there we have it. That is the Gaming in the Wild Games of the Year 2022 Final Cut podcast, done and dusted. That is the 10 games that I have laboured over this year. That list has moved around a fair bit, but I'm really happy with it. I think this was an absolutely stellar year for video games, especially for indie games. And that top 3 of Citizen Sleeper, Stray and Immortality is just a trilogy of completely unforgettable games. It's such a strong list. I'm very happy to have played them all, and I'm very happy that you were along for the ride with me. I will say that if you would like to hear more about any of those games, there are episodes about all of them in the podcast back catalogue for the year. There is an hour-long deep dive into Immortality. You can find dedicated reviews of PowerWash Simulator, Haiku the Robot. I had a very long conversation with friend of the show, Kieran Daly, about Elden Ring. So you can hear a lot more about those games if you would like to. And I also invite you to check out the previous Games of the Year 2022 series with Brian Skirsha, Brad Galloway and Louis Brooks. There is loads of great conversation to be had there. There is also the patron poll for Games of the Year, and I think hilariously, all of the patrons of this show voted on their personal Games of the Year. I added up all of the numbers and crunched the numbers, and funnily enough, the top 5 games, the patrons had Elden Ring at number 1, but they had Stray at number 2, Citizen Sleeper at number 3, NORCO at number 4, and Tinykin at number 5, and my list has come out exactly the same, so I can't quite believe that. I'm in absolute lockstep with the show's patrons, so it seems, although I don't think a lot of people have played Immortality, but maybe they will now, who knows. So thanks very much for listening, and thanks for being along for the ride with me on this one. If you are a first-time listener or a long-time listener who likes what you've heard today, you are, of course, welcome to come and support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. You'll get extra episodes, a Discord invite, and loads of fun stuff like that. If you've enjoyed this one, please do share the episode with a friend. Please do give the podcast a star rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on. But most of all, just thank you very much for listening. Thanks for being here. Come find me on social media if you'd like to talk games. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, etc. as Gaming in the Wild. And I'll be back soon. I think I'm going to do a 2023 preview, looking at some of the games that are coming out this month. And I'll be getting back to normal service with some indie game reviews in the near future. So take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.